I get the lovely topic of health and safety, so please bear with me. When I arrived in this morning, Matthew was speaking and he had his lab coat on him, and I was kind of thinking, damn, I should have brought a high-vis vest. But anyway, I didn't. It might have been a little bit too village people for this event. Anyway, so I suppose just clicking on, I'm not going to read all these out. You might have noticed by the voice I'm not from around these parts, but a lot of what I would go through is very relevant to here, and it's relevant to other countries as well. I'm not going to get down into the depths of legislation, so hopefully that'll be you'll be happy to hear that. And also a lot of the stuff is I'm not going to cover absolutely everything. I'm not going to cover. There's a lot of things that are site specific, and there's a lot of things that are project specific if you're developing a new distillery, etc. So what I do hope you'll walk out from here with is some good general tips and information, and hopefully you'll get some takeaways from that. So why worry about this stuff? Maybe if we just refer back to the previous talk, we were talking about brand building, and you can do a lot of work on building your brand, but if you become known as a distillery who killed somebody, that does a lot of damage to your reputation. Some of my kind of big clients encapsulate this very well in terms of the way they've it's not health and safety, they've taglined it as Heineken, it's home safe. So the kind of concept that everyone goes home safe at the end of the day. Diageo take that a bit further, they call it zero harm. So zero harm to people, also zero harm to the environment. So, these concepts are good. Don't be evil, very famous company as well. I think they've dropped that tagline at this stage, but again, it's we talk about CSR, again, that feeds into your brand and your reputation. And then I suppose importantly as well, it's kind of, this is maybe hiding it, don't kill yourself, don't kill anyone else, don't end up in jail, don't end up closed down, and don't end up in debt, because if you don't take cognizance of health and safety and environmental issues, any of those things could happen to you. So I'm not going to read all of this. The Health and Safety Executive, it's a UK body, you should all have a go and have a good route around their website. This is just the main causes of injury in food and drink. So a lot of these are common across manufacturing industry. So manual handling, lifting, slips, trips, falls, falling objects, etc., etc. There's some kind of specific ones: cleaning chemicals, hot liquids, noise-related issues in bottling halls, etc. So there's things like dust as well. So, but a lot of that stuff is very, very generic. So just good basic stuff: manual handling. If you look at where the injuries happen, a lot of injuries happen. Biggest case of injuries is to people's backs, and then if you look at this other category, and these are actually Irish stats, but I'm sure they're pretty similar for the UK. So these are non-fatal workplace injury stats. So it's manual handling, it's slips, trips and falls, and basic stuff, simple stuff. There's no excuse that this kind of things can't be dealt with, and it's very easy to try and train and mitigate these risks. It's not particularly technical. So talk about some design considerations. So if you're building, if you're starting a premises, or if you're extending, and again I'll just click straight into the detail here. So premises, there's some interesting ones here. Obviously you want a building that's going to stay up. You've got to be cognizant of things like asbestos, things like dry rot, mold, fungus, stuff like that in buildings, and I've seen all this stuff in different buildings that we've gone to look at. I just pulled this picture of a little cottage, rundown cottage off the internet somewhere, but sometimes we go and see people and they're saying, yeah, I'm going to put a distillery in that field there, and we've got this building. Sometimes it's better when they have a building like that than if they have a building that's fully constructed, because the building that's fully constructed has a lot of issues, and you have to go and tell them, or you have to advise them that they should get a civil engineer to tell them that the building is not safe and the building should be taken down and rebuilt. And that can be quite difficult to somebody who's just spent a lot of money on a building. Interesting one as well, load-bearing capacity. So this happened was we were looking at a brewery for somebody, craft brewery, not particularly big vessels, but they talked to the local civil engineer on the ground, and he said this site is built on reclaimed marsh, and there's no load-bearing capacity in this building. So there was a tiled floor, it had a previous use as something else, but there was literally, if you put a vessel that was going to have a ton of liquid in it, it was going to go straight down through the floor. Just moving on then, so when you're designing layouts, be cognizant of things. You've got to get in and maintain equipment, you've got to take out pumps, you've got to take out instruments, you've got to do this sort of stuff in the future. You're all hopefully going to expand in the future, so how's your layout going to accommodate that? How are you going to store IBCs? How are you going to store pallets of product, pallets of bottles, labels, etc.? Where's the forklift going to go? How's the forklift going to turn in the building if you're bringing the forklift in? Should you be even bringing a forklift into the building, etc., etc.? These kind of things, it's very important to not just design in the stills, design in the people, design in the pallet trucks, design in the pallets, the forklift, and where all this stuff is going to happen. You've got to be careful of how your employees get in and out, how your deliveries get in and out, and again be conscious of things like schools and other facilities nearby. Very important one in these times, security. So how people access or how people don't access your distillery out of hours or during hours. And then obviously customs are going to be quite concerned around this in terms of is your building safe and secure, so the product doesn't start walking out of there. I'll keep going here on that. So designing out risks. So I've probably covered a lot of this. Simple things. Make sure the premise is easy to secure. So are there doors you can lock, shutters you can put up, or are there multiple points of entry that make it very difficult to actually secure the premises in the evening time or whatever? Be careful of things like level changes in process area. Again, slips, trips and falls. If you can design those things out, don't have them there. Try and avoid having to carry stuff up and down stairs. Again, very basic, simple stuff. Make your floors free draining. So again, you're not going to have liquid lodging. You're not going to have slips, trips and falls. You're also not going to have scum and dirt and mold and things growing on your floors, which when you bring the auditors from M&S or whoever else around, they're not going to like to see stuff like that. They're also, if your drains don't work, you're going to potentially have smells there. So again, and the day you'll have a smell in your drain is the day that you have the auditor coming, and I'm sure some in the audience have experienced that. Certainly some of my clients have. Good ventilation, very important. Again, keeps down things like mold, but it's important when you're looking at it. Can be a good pragmatic solution to helping you to overcome issues around ATEX and explosion protection. Things like noise, again, if you have utilities equipment like compressors, etc., you can either put them in a separate room or you can design in acoustic housings. And good housekeeping, again, don't leave hoses lying around the place, don't leave stuff lying around the place, tidy up, clean the place, and again, not technical, very basic, but it's surprising the stuff you will see when you go out to plants. Equipment, so choose from a reputable manufacturer. If you're buying a nice still, make sure, and it's copper, make sure that the copper is actually copper and that you can verify that. Make sure that the equipment has the appropriate kind of certifications around things like pressure, etc. Make sure that the still they've taken cognizance of ATEX as well, and you may need to challenge some vendors from countries who probably should know a little better around things like ATEX motors, etc. Don't necessarily take the vendor's word because for granted, because it may pass muster in Germany, but it may not absolve you of your responsibilities from UK or Irish law around things like ATEX. Probably the most important thing up there is the cooling supply to condensers. So it's really, 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 really important that you don't start your still without the cooling in place in the condensers, and you should have either control system in place to do that, or you should have manual procedures, and that should be probably number one lesson that you train your staff on, and that you make sure that everybody knows, because that's their number one job, is to make sure that the cooling is on the condensers before you start to distill. Again, things like working at heights, so you can design out issues with this, so valves and instruments, put them somewhere where they can be accessed from ground level. You don't have to get up on a ladder, you don't have to do things like that to access them. If something is, if you can't get over it, put in a suitable means of access, so be that a platform or have a proper safe type of stairs that people aren't going to fall off. Again, avoid trip hazards, avoid repetitive hazards if possible, so things like if you're hand bottling, if you're people operating a bottling line, move the people around so they're not doing the same thing every day, so that you don't get these issues. And this guy Homer here, to protect the guilty, this is actually a video of a small distillery. They have a nice little Portuguese still, but on the video the guy is there and he's got a cloth and he's lifting the top of the hot still off, and it's just asking for trouble, asking to be burned, and worse, they've put it on the internet and they're showing everybody that this is how they operate. So in the event that somebody does burn themselves, this is in the court, my lord. This is how we do things around here, and did you take appropriate measures to protect your employees? Not really, because the evidence is there, it's on the internet for everyone to see. Okay, move on. Right, again, I'm not going to read all this stuff. ATEX is really important, it's the law. If you don't have measures in place to protect your employees from an explosion, and there is an explosion, you, the operator of the distillery, will go to jail or can go to jail, and that is the law in the UK, that is the law in Ireland. So I suppose what you've got to do to try and mitigate that risk is you've got to carry out a risk assessment. In Ireland, the law is you've got to have a document called the Explosion Protection Document, which collates the risk assessment and the P&IDs and the equipment lists and the procedures, etc. It's good practice to do that here as well, and really that's the way of protecting yourselves. You put in place technical or organisational measures, so either you have pressure transmitters, etc., and things like that in place, or else you have operator procedures to prevent an explosion. So things like making sure, if you don't have a control system, make sure that the cooling is on the condensers, make sure that everyone is trained and knows that that's their job. So you need to have suitable, you need to classify places and you need to have suitable equipment in those places, but there's ways around that. So if you design it properly, you shouldn't have a lot of equipment within the ATEX zone, or there's ways around it. If you have good ventilation in an area, there's ways of reducing the size of your zone, so you don't have to have everything in the area. You can keep your lights at a distance where they don't need to be ATEX lights. So good design can play a part here. Okay, fire and explosion. So where did the fire and explosion risk come from? So basically vapor from a leak of some sort, and or dust, or two separate cases, but dust, vapor or dust, and an ignition source, bang, right? The ignition source can come from open flames, sparks, hot surfaces, torch, cutting and welding. I was in a distillery one day, and there was stills here, there was casks stored here about 5 high. They were on those kind of nice racks where you can rotate the casks. There was a forklift kind of going in and out, and there was guys that were doing some work outside, and they had a sheet of plywood on the ground, and they were using a skill saw, and there was sparks flying, and I was going, I'm getting the hell out of here. But just be really sensible about what you do, and a lot of it is good common sense. Don't leave it still unattended. Make sure you have ventilation. I talked about, if you can, ABV below the flash point and contain spills. So again, when you're designing your plant, if you can contain the spills, contain the place where a spill can go to, that can reduce the size of your ATEX zone. And why is this important? The explosions didn't rank on the most common things in food and drink industries, but stills do explode. This was in Kentucky in April 2015. I was there earlier in April 2015, I think. This is a small distillery, Silver Trail Distillery. 2 guys seriously injured. Kyle Rogers died on less than a month later, and his cousin Jay Rogers was seriously injured as a result of this. The issue was basically the still wasn't designed to hold pressure and wasn't equipped with the correct pressure relief valve. So basically, in that case, and because it was the States, the still manufacturer got sued. If that happened here, the operator, the owner, gets sued and potentially goes to jail. So this was the distillery before the thing, and that was the distillery afterwards. So just be really, really careful of this stuff. So on that cheerful note, moving on. Any of you who are fermenting on site, CO2 is a byproduct of fermentation, and it's really important to have strategies in place to deal with that. Ventilation, and again, just design of your facility. So a very small amount of CO2 can cause death within 5 minutes. 7% can kill in 5 minutes. And typically they say, in kind of the brewers will be very familiar with this, but typically they say, you know, when people die from CO2 poisoning, it's generally 2 people die because somebody gets affected by it and then somebody else goes in after them and 2 people die. So again, you know, it can be dealt with. You put in place things, you put in place ventilation, and you put in place detection and monitoring. And detection and monitoring has got much better, and it's relatively cheap to do. So it's something just well worth considering. My next little hobby horse, confined spaces. So if you can, don't put people into confined spaces. There's a lot of issues around it. There's a lot of responsibilities around it and a lot of obligations on you if you're putting people into confined spaces. So basically you must have a system of work in place. You must have training, you must have suitable emergency procedures, and you must have work permits. If you can design this out, design it out. Chemicals, right. Has anyone ever got caustic on their skin? Hands up. Did you feel the kind of soapy thing? So it's actually saponifying your skin. So not particularly nice. And I know guys who've got acid in their eyes as well, and that's not nice either. So, you know, be careful when you're handling chemicals. Use appropriate PPE. Mixing caustic and water, do it the right way around. Another interesting thing, and I was talking about floors and load bearing in floors. There was a very famous situation in Africa in a large beverage company, and they had a filling hall, and one day the filler fell down through the floor, whole big massive filler. What happened was, over years, the caustic was leaching down through the tiles into the floor. There was kind of a chalky rock underneath, and it just ate away and ate away and ate away to the point where there was no rock left, and bang. So again, you know, extreme situation, but these kind of things do happen. So try to minimise your spills and make sure that your floors and things are suitable for dealing with whatever chemicals you've got. Have the appropriate MSDSs, PPE, I've mentioned that. Have proper bunding in place and segregated bunding for acids and alkalis. Training, again, train your staff. Simple thing to do, but you know, can have benefits. How do you be conscious of what you do with your chemicals at the end of the day as well when you're finished with them? So, little way around maybe some of these issues is automation. And you know, people go, oh, I'm a craft distiller, I can't do automation. But I think automation is potentially a good thing. It can have safety benefits, but also capacity and OPEX cost benefits. It can help eliminate these unsafe tasks and confined space issues. Also give you consistency benefits. Just this little video here with the guys in their underpants. It's some of you were at my talk in Glasgow last week. This is from Powers Johns Lane Distillery. There's a link on this to it. It's a nice little video of distilling in Dublin in the 1970s. So just a little add-on there. But this is how it used to be done. There's no reason why you should be putting people into vessels doing stuff like this nowadays. You know, try and move on from there. How do you, just a little kind of more formal way around how you kind of eliminate some of these issues. So HAZOP it's a methodical risk assessment technique And I suppose what it is it's not just a design review, it's also a review, it's a hazard and operability study. So it's the equipment, but it's also how you operate the equipment. So it's actually a good training exercise for people working in the distillery. So basically, they actually get to understand to a level how the equipment works, but also you have the right people in the room. It's critical that you do the right follow-up after this as well. Some of this may require kind of a bit more depth and may require a formal kind of risk assessment. So again, identify the hazard, determine the level of risk, and put in place controls and inform. And again, this type of stuff can seem a bit heavy, but in the event of an incident in the future, this is your get out of jail clause. This is what shows that you've taken the appropriate steps and measures to ensure that people don't get hurt or incidents don't happen. So, another bit of kind of experience here. You know, when you're bringing in equipment, it's very easy to sort of say, sure, we'll just lift it off the truck ourselves. I'd be quite conscious of kind of advising people, leave it to the professionals, leave it to people who know what they're doing, if it's any size of equipment. Small brewery in Ireland, a couple of years ago, owner's 4-year-old son was killed, tank fell on top of him. Not a nice situation. Somebody's got to live with that for the rest of their lives. So, you know, these type of things, it's worth paying the extra few quid, getting somebody in who actually knows what they're doing. They won't damage the equipment, no one will get injured, and they'll be in and out much quicker than you will trying to lift it in and out of the forklift and lift it in and out of the truck. This thing here is quite a large tank, but interestingly, they have 2 cranes working here, so on the top and tail of the vessel. Also, things things like slings and shackles and all this sort of stuff, they have to be inspected, and they have they're certified for a period of time. And if you don't have them certified, they're not guaranteed to work and to be in place. So again, in the event of an incident, in the event of something breaking, something happening, somebody getting injured, this is the sort of stuff that will be picked up on. You know, was the right lifting gear in place? This is not how you do it. This one here, and again the number plate removed to protect the guilty. Don't give enough time. Don't rush this stuff. You know, you have method statements in place. It takes a bit of time to put in place, but it's well worth doing. And it makes people think through what they're going to do, and hopefully will prevent issues happening. So again, things you can do either when you're putting into place or when you're running. So there's management procedures you can put in place, and these are low-tech stuff, a lot of them, but you know, it's about creating a safer work environment. So and also protecting your product. So things like broken glass procedures. So again, protects people from getting hurt, but also protects glass from getting into your product. And some of you who deal with the bigger retailers will be quite conscious of this, because it's something they will insist upon. Also have procedures for spills and leaks and stuff, so clean things up quickly, get them dealt with, and then you won't have people slipping and sliding on them. Have a system of work permits in place, and again, you don't need to be very complicated in this, but you just need to make sure that if somebody has to access a vessel or a piece of equipment, that it's switched off, locked off, and everyone who needs to know knows that it's actually, you know, you don't switch on that particular piece of equipment. Working at heights, etc., things like that. Lockout, tag-out systems are good. So basically, if you switch off a motor, you can lock it out and tag it out, and then basically you eliminate the possibility of somebody coming along by accident and switching it on. Again, good housekeeping, training comes in place here as well. And again, training is you know, it's cheap compared to the cost of an incident. Product safety. So there was this touches on some of the stuff that was talked about earlier by Matthew with the botanicals, and I know Henrik is going to talk about botanicals and stuff as well. My first point, I suppose, I worked for 2 years in a dairy company, and it was a food factory. So we had snood caps and we had white coats, and the beverage industry aren't particularly good at that. But particularly when you're dealing with things like botanicals, when you're dealing with maybe lower ABV spirits, you know, it's maybe something you should consider. And then as you deal with the bigger, as you deal with the BRC and as you deal with the bigger retailers, they will want HACCP and they'll want systems like that in place. So build in good practices from the start, and they will stand to you and they'll protect you in the future. If you have botanicals, have appropriate storage for them. So again, do you need refrigerated storage? Do you need dry storage, etc.? Really, really important one, and I see Catherine from the IBD is here, and this came up at the World Distillers Birds Conference in Scotland last week as well, was the importance of training for distillers. So basically, people should be trained and should be of a standard where they know that when to take the cuts and that they should take cuts. And the IBD have a fantastic syllabus for training people, and I'm sure Catherine would be quite happy to talk to anyone there about that as well. The other interesting thing, and this is something that kind of I'm quite interested in, is the botanical mix you use. And again, we talked about earlier as well. So, certain botanicals, meadowsweet was mentioned. David mentioned meadowsweet earlier. Meadowsweet has kind of have similar properties to aspirin, and you've got to be conscious of putting too much of things like that in, and there are limits from the FDA and limits in the US and limits from EFSA about what you can have in products. So be conscious of those and what they are, and when you're developing new products, if you think you're putting loads of something in, it might be a cheap exercise to go and get a test done to make sure you're not overdosing on some of these things. I have the blackberries up here. A couple of years ago, myself and my wife were down on the shores of Lough Ree, where I come from, and we were down a little side road. We were picking blackberries, and the guy from up the road came out and he says, "Don't pick the ones on that side of the road because I sprayed it with Roundup yesterday." So know where you're picking. If you're foraging, know where you're foraging and what you're foraging for. Tamper-proof bottles. So again, I had a client who gave a sample of a bottle to a potential customer. It had one of these just tamper strips on it, and the customer put it in his car, went off to another meeting, came out of the other meeting a couple of hours later, the top had come off the bottle, it was lovely gin smell all over his hire car, wasn't too impressed. They didn't buy product from the customer. So, make sure you can't get the lids off your bottles, have capsules or have protective things if you have the tamper strips. There's loads places for more information. So the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, Health and Safety Authority in Ireland, the ATEX and risk assessments, talk to a good engineering consultancy. The other stuff, the manual handling, safety statements, etc., talk to a local health and safety consultancy who can do training and stuff on that for you. If you have a project, you need somebody with the appropriate health and safety credentials to run the project. I suppose the last point on this is accidents do happen, and be prepared for them. So know where to get accident reporting forms. Have people trained in your company to, if there is an accident, you write everything down, you know what happened, so that in the event that there is somebody is injured and there is an investigation, you know how to deal with it. I'm pushed for time, so I will probably I'll skip through very quickly this. So energy efficient design, I'm not going to dwell on it, but basically when you're designing a new plant, when you're putting in a new plant, you have a good opportunity to start to make a big change, make a step change from an energy point of view, from a water point of view. As you get through to the point where you're constructing and where you're operating, it's much more difficult to go back in and sort out issues. So consider it at the start if you're doing a big investment. I won't dwell on this, so you can read those afterwards yourselves. Water use, again, so water in the UK, water in the US is quite an issue, but in the UK there's quite a number of water stress areas here as well. So, if you can reduce water, it's worth considering at design stage. Well, I suppose I will say about water, be careful where you're getting your water from, and again, there was talk about branding, and we see a lot of stuff about magic water and special water and water coming from springs and whatever, and sheep poo in streams, so just be conscious of that. You also get eels and frogs and things in streams, so just make sure you're testing your water, and that if you're taking water from that source, that you're treating it or you're protecting yourself from those type of issues. Co-products, I'll blast through this, I suppose. Spent botanicals, just one point, you're all making gin. don't feed juniper berries to cattle, etc. Juniper berries can have an abortive effect, and again, you don't want to be the distillery that caused cattle to die or caused calves to be lost or whatever. Again, bad for your brand. Don't pollute a river, so deal with your botanicals and your waste streams correctly. Your waste streams could potentially be a promising source of polyphenols. That's a whole other discussion. I'm just going to skip through it all. We have a nice little piece of equipment for pulling them out of gin tails, etc. And this is kind of roughly how it works. Again, talk to me afterwards if you're interested in it. In the interest of time, I'll keep going. Okay, so thank you very much, folks.